Hello everyone and welcome again to another session of my YouTube channel. My proposal this week is going to be discussing about backward design, which is going to be focusing the principle of understanding by design. Most of the time when I have conversations with colleagues or participants in different workshops, there's a tendency to discuss about what is the best way of planning. How can we plan in a way that is meaningful, that is purposeful? And for me, it's interesting to make clear that I don't think there's a best way. It depends on you, it depends on your students, it depends on your context. But what I'm going to do here is to share what works for me, which it does not mean that will be perfect for you. It will mean that basically it's one way of doing it, and I can tell you that for me, it does work. And it's important also to mention that when we talk about backward planning or backward design, this does not only affect lesson planning, it also affects unit planning, so at a longer period of time, and it can also be used to plan the whole school curriculum. So it's not only one particular aspect, we can talk about planning in a longer period of time. So basically, just so you know, this session is going to be based on this book called Understanding by Design, written by Wiggins and McTighe. And I will also be using information from a particular website that will appear at the end of the session in the last slide. A book that I advise you to read. It's very interesting and gives a new insight of what do we understand by planning and understanding by design. The first thing I would like you to ask, or I would like to ask you is, let's think about real life. When we plan routines, for example, when we plan a trip with a family, when we plan the dishes that we're going to cook, or when we plan to get a degree or planting a garden, any real life situation that demands a planning process. How do you plan it? How do you do that? For example, when you plan a trip, do you fill in your luggages with the clothes you find in your locker and then on your wardrobe, and then you go to the airport and you pick the first flight that comes? Or you first think on the destination or where you want to go, what objectives do you have in terms of trips, and then you plan backwards? When you cook for the family, do you just open the fridge, get whatever you find in there and cook something? Or you maybe think about what do you want to cook? What dish do you want to prepare? And then you plan backwards and you go and do your groceries and so on. So basically, why does the backward planning work for me? Because I think it's the one that mirrors real life. Because when I plan things in life, I first look at the objective, at what I want to do. I start from there and then I plan backwards. Looking at, for example, the curriculum that you might teach, whichever curriculum it is, you probably look at the final exams, being benchmark exams, being IB exams, being A levels, and then from there, you plan what you are going to teach in the years below. So you build your school curriculum having as a target, as an objective, the final exams. Now, when we look at normal design, and I'm sorry I used quotation marks because normal, I don't know which other words I could have used, is that I would like you to think on how do you plan your lessons? How do you plan your curriculum? How do you do it right now? Maybe some of you already plan backwards. And by the way, I have to say that backward planning, it's not flipped classrooms. We need to be careful with that. Flipped classrooms is a teaching strategy. Backward planning or backward design is a planning strategy. And we can use flipped classrooms as a strategy into our planning process. But I'm going to use this source, Bowen, when he says that teachers have the tendency to design forward, meaning that they consider the learning activities, so how to teach the content, develop the assessments based on those learning activities, and then the attempt to draw connections to the learning goals of the course. This is the tendency based on this study done in 2017. That might be you. That might be one of the ways you plan, which is totally fine. What is backward design? Is the opposite. In contrast then, the backward design has the teachers considering the learning goals of the course first. Being the course, being the unit, being the topic, being the lesson, being whatever it is. But considering the goals, the objectives, the learning goals. These learning goals embody the knowledge, the skills that teachers want their students to have learned when they leave the course. So we first backward design things first on the outcomes, the objectives. What do we want our students to have learned after the lesson, after the topic, or after the unit? And then we plan backwards. And when we plan backwards, it's not only planning the knowledge, it's planning the skills, the assessment strategies, the formative tasks, the summative tasks, the reflection process, but having as a goal the first step. So identifying the desired results, and then moving into looking for the evidence, and then going back into the planning the learning experiences. So this is a way in which we can divide the backward design. 3 stages, very simple. The first one is identify the results. So what do we want the students to learn? This is our wish. This is the objective of that particular lesson or topic. Then once we have these objectives clear in mind, we're going to determine, we're going to think about what kind of an evidence do we want to collect to make sure that we reach those results. And then we plan the learning experiences, the teaching strategies. How do we want this evidence to be gathered by our students? Let's have a look at each one of these stages. The first one is basically, what do we want our students to learn? Or what do we want our students to know? And then I've highlighted what for me are the key terms of these. So for example, what do we want the students to explore, to encounter? What knowledge, what skills do we want them to master in that unit? What are the big ideas or the important understandings that they should retain? Yeah, so basically, we can, and that's a tip from me, that's not part of the design backwards, is what about using an inquiry cycle to get there? What about using factual questions to look at what do we want our students to explore? What about using conceptual questions when we want to understand what kind of concepts do we want them to understand, or the skills? And let's go into more debatable questions, more open questions, where we want the students to develop critical thinking skills in a way that what big ideas, what important understanding we want them to get from that topic. So that's the first stage. And once we have this first stage solved, let's move to the second stage. How are we going to measure what the students are learning? How are we going to plan the assessment? And by the way, just a hint, what kind of a performance do we want to see? And if you want to know more about performance-based tasks, feel free to go and have a look at the video that is in my YouTube channel about performance-based tasks. So this is what we're going to plan. And we can ask ourselves the following questions. How will I know what the students have achieved? How will I know that whatever the students have achieved meets the desired results? How do I know that what they've learned is exactly what I want them to learn in the objectives, in the first stage? And then finally, what will I accept as evidence of their understanding? What do we want? A written paper, an oral presentation, a performance task, a collaboration work, a communication strategy, a role play? So it is time to think about what kind of assessment methods are we going to use. And we have plenty of them. I gave some examples earlier on, but we do have different strategies of assessment that we're going to discuss in this stage. And finally, the third stage is what activities will my students do? So what kind of a formative assessment will I put in place to assess the learning process? What experiences am I going to plan that will allow students to enable knowledge and skills? So principles and processes to support them in achieving the results that I have in stage 1. What activities will equip students with the needed knowledge and skills? And I'm constantly using the word skills because this is crucial in the development of secondary curriculums. And this is a way to see also backward planning, plan on skills. We're going to see an example later on. What will need to be taught or facilitated in order for the students to reach those goals? And what resources are we going to use? Books, websites? Are we going to use citations? Do we want to work on research skills? Do we want them to develop certain aspects of media literacy skills for them to use the appropriate materials and resources? So basically, those are the 3 stages of the backward design. What about making it skill-based? What about starting by the learning outcome? That will always be the first stage, the objective. What do we want them to learn? And then look at what skills will they need to meet that outcome. So instead of putting content, let's focus on skills. And then build up the content that will help them to develop certain skills to meet the outcome. I think this is a very interesting approach on supporting our students to build up their confidence and their learning process. An interesting template that I found on the website that you will see later on, very interesting, because it's a template that can be used in many ways. It can be used by the teacher to plan backwards. You see the 3 stages there: desired result, evidence, and learning plan. But I invite you to share that with your students and ask the students to fill it in as they were the owners of the unit or the lesson. That brings engagement, motivation. And my advice would be, the more we integrate students into the planning process, the better for them to feel part of it, to increase motivation, to increase engagement and understanding. So a very simple template that I invite you to use and share with your students, and even ask them to fill it in by replacing the word students by I. I will be able to independently use my learning to, I will understand that, I will know that. So that reflection process comes from the start of the unit. Now, a couple of questions that can come to your mind when thinking about this design planning process, and then I would like to leave the questions open for you to try to answer those questions, and if possible, write in the chat what your answers would be. Some of them I gave my opinion already throughout this session, some others I haven't. The first one, of course, is, can we plan our horizontal and vertical curriculum this way? Being horizontal, the curriculum that covers one year group, and vertical is the curriculum structured across the school or across the programs. Can we also plan backwards? Or planning backwards only works for units, topics, lessons? Second question, how far can we go in backwards planning? Can we structure the whole school curriculum, planning backwards? And then we just look at the objective being the final exams in grade 12, in whichever year your curriculum finishes? Third question, can students take part of the planning? What do you think? Is it feasible? Have you tried that? And if you have, I would love to read your experiences in the chat of this presentation. It'll be amazing, because I'm really looking forward to see who has tried that and have some feedback and sharing best practice on that. Who sets the objectives or the outcomes? You, the head of school, the department, the team, the students, the national curriculum? Who sets the objectives for this planning? Another question, does it have to be content-based? So your objectives, are they content-based? Can we have something else as objectives? We did mention skills already. Can you have concepts? Can you have big ideas? Can you have general understanding? And finally, what skills do we need to plan backwards? Not what skills do we want to teach. What skills do we need as teachers to plan backwards effectively? Is it something that has to be done individually? Can it be done in collaboration? Can it be done across subjects? What do you think? So I'm looking forward to see your answers to these questions in the chat, so we can start interacting and giving our opinion on backward planning. And finally, these are the two main sources that I've used for this session. Very interesting resources that I'm inviting you to analyze in depth. The book that I mentioned in the first slide, and then the website that I found rich with examples, with the sample document that I shared with you. It comes from that website, Teaching for Enduring Understanding. Yeah. So I hope you found this session useful. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and to share these videos with your staff, if you're a school leader, with your colleagues, if you're a teacher, and please send me your feedback and your reflections. Reflections is what makes us move forward and what makes us be better. Thank you very much.